All right. Hi, Andrew. Welcome to the Luchi and Mutton's podcast. I am very, very excited about this for lots of different reasons. Because one, this is our 14th episode, and I am hoping to launch it on the 14th of February, which is Valentine's Day, which I think is also perfectly fitting in with the theme of what we're going to talk about. So, thank you so much for being here. Really, really looking forward to this.
Well, I'm just really chuffed that you've asked me, and it's always great to share space with you. And I love what you're doing at the moment, so I had to jump at this chance to have a chat with you, and to go out on the 14th. That's a beautiful thing because a lot of what we do is come from the heart, right? So I think that's a great thing. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to tell you that I tried to do a lot of prep for this conversation. And so I spent lots of time watching your talks on Dog Centered Care, which is your incredible group on Facebook. I was making really diligent notes of what I could ask you. And I think the more I kept listening to you, the more I realized that I actually just wanted to talk and keep it as free flowing as I could. And just essentially, yeah, just talk. So I'm going to keep it as flowy as that. And we'll make what we can of the episode. And hopefully, this will be a great conversation that the two of us enjoy, and hopefully, everyone who tunes in as well. Does that sound okay?
Guarantee you that we'll enjoy it because I always enjoy. So that would be great. We'll leave everybody else to decide whether they do, but I know we will. So.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna start by I think sharing a little bit of my experience of I think listening to you talk and just what that has been a little bit like. I found that you're one of the very very few people outside of parks essentially, right, which has largely been my community, uh, who talks so much and so beautifully about lived experiences of dogs, but also lived experiences of the human in that relationship. And I think in all the conversations that I have seen of you, in my own conversation that I've had with you, I have found that you offer so much recognition, so much space, so much acceptance for varied lived experiences. And you don't really come from a place of this is wrong, this is right. It's just, I think, an invitation to say, okay, what is your lived experience, and can we try and make meaning of that? And I think that that's so beautiful and it's so rare. Can you tell me a little bit about where that's come from and how that's evolved for you? Was that always your orientation, or has that changed over a period of time?
I think that's a really insightful way to start because I think you've touched on the essence of a lot of what I try and talk about. And actually, there is some friction in that, even for us, because on the one side, we want to try and be recognize the unique, beautiful richness of the individual's lived experience, whilst also recognizing the filter through which it passes through, which is our own. And that can be a tricky thing to navigate sometimes. And actually, my own story on this really is a very personal one because, I've talked about this on other platforms, and I'll share a little bit here because it's important for me. I look at my own experience, my own trauma, my own sexualized trauma when I was younger, and how that affected my behavior. The thing about trauma, when I had that experience when I was younger, this is with non-family members, I always like to throw that in, nothing changes, you see. Nothing changes around you. My parents, same, family is the same, school's the same, friends are the same. What changes is your perception of it. That's what trauma does, you see. And that affected my behavior, and it was a tough time. And looking back, I recognize that the way that we consider consequence, especially with dogs, that kind of linear way of thinking about consequence just isn't right, because my school took an approach with me of quite punitive approach, building up to having the cane. which is, it's crazy, right? Yes, we used to hit kids with canes, right? And I had the cane, and guess what? My behavior changed. So that was the consequence, right? So punishment works, great. My parents took an approach of understanding. My parents were amazing. I was spoiled as a kid, got everything I wanted. Apart from what I really wanted, actually, was my parents, because they were both quite high flyers and they worked very hard. They were out a lot and they socialized a lot. So they said, we recognize that maybe we're not around enough, so we will spend more time as a family, dependent on, contingent on, talk about contingencies in dog training course, on you behaving differently. So guess what? I behaved differently again. So you had a punitive and a positive approach. But the real consequence was my breakdown and my drug addiction some 10 plus years later, because actually for me as an individual, all that had changed was my behavior. All that had changed was my view that somehow I have to behave in a certain way to be valued and be seen. And then on top of that, being a member of the LGBTQ community, of course, you come into a world around you that is heavily based on somehow having to behave based on conformist norms. I just wanted to share that, Surabhi, at the beginning, because then, of course, I ended up going into kind of did my human psychology degree and did various types of kind of therapeutic jobs and other jobs, by the way. I worked in a cinema for a while and I worked in a hotel for a while. It wasn't all that, but anyway, that's another story. So that sets the grounding for me, because I was already deeply against the notion of that good-bad continuum, this societal norm, the conformist norm, and the recognition that, yes, we do need to have those rules and societal social decencies and all this kind of thing. But that's fine if you're able to, and if it's representative of you as self. Then we come on to all the kind of things that we think about regarding power dynamics and everything else. So I was very attuned to all that. What was interesting for me during the human support, my human psychology days, was that it was very much about you as an individual. And this is where the whole dog-centered care came from, because I took that from the notion of child-centered care or patient-centered care. Not me saying to you, okay, I know what's best for you. You will do this in order to whatever. It's a case of what's your experience? What's your truth? What is it that you need to think about regarding your journey to find self? When I came to working with dogs, I found it really interesting, the huge operant bias. You kind of question it a little bit. And then in the early days, when I first started working with dogs, I did question it a little bit. And the common response was, but they're dogs. And we're not talking about humans now. And we don't know how they think and feel, and maybe emotions. And we just need to look at what behavior does. And it was meeting Sarah Fisher, which was, Sarah was the first person who really kind of gave me permission to think a little bit more. And that's where my Phantom of the Opera article came out, which about 4 or 5 years ago, gave me the courage to think, well, maybe I need to put this down then. So I think so that's just a little kind of thing about where this foundation is for me, because the emotional experience lens, as I kind of frame it, really, we all have one. We are all a unique combination of our genetics, our learning experiences, our insecure attachments, our trauma, whatever, And this is why I think science struggles with some bits to get a model that fits all, because there's just so many combinational things that go on in our lives that create the filter through which we perceive other and through which we perceive self. So I think when we turn up then, for us then as professionals, when you think about it, our primary job is to turn up to and be available to and potentially change the behavior of another living sentient being. So I think we owe it to them and their caregivers to try and find as many ways as we can to become more available to that truth, their truth, not necessarily our judgment of it. And that can be tricky. This is the tricky bit, as I said, because there is a friction there, because I see the world differently to how you see the world. It's different to how my husband, we all see the world in our own way. So we have to try and navigate that. And I can see why it's a lot easier to think, won't bother with that, then we'll just get the dog to do stuff or not do stuff. That's easy. So all this then, everything we're talking about, and obviously I'm really very aware of the fact that there are so many people who've been talking about this side of things, and they talk about it now and have done ahead of us, you know, Turid and Sarah Fisher and Sheila Harper and all these wonderful people that have questioned some of the received wisdoms. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, because the individual, there's been a push in recent years towards the science, which is important because it was the Wild West before, for sure. But the dial almost went too far a little bit. And I'll just explain that way, because the objectiveness that science gives us is important. It really is. We have to have some grounding. But actually, we also need to have the conversations that you and I enjoy, those kind of asking questions that we might not even have the answer to, because the individual lived experience lives in the subjective, the anecdotal. There's a richness there. And that's why, again, the things that you educate about and Sindor and the Barks approach specifically, which is let's just learn a bit from the dog first, actually. And that's the key. That's that shift from a task transactional approach, which is the heavy normal training stuff, to more of a care approach, which is more relational, which is a case of maybe we could be humble enough just to learn from the other first. And I can learn from you as best I can based on my existence. But we can find ways to look at doing that. And those are some of the things that I educate about.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think when you were, and of course I've heard you talk about your journey a little bit before, but even as you were talking about it now, I feel like as you talk about your journey, I think you paint such a powerful picture of your inner world, you know. And I think I see the friction even in that, the friction of what your inner world is experiencing versus how you are showing up for the outside world. Um, and I think that there's so much of that that I personally resonate as well with. I think just in my journey, I think having been through my share of trauma and loss very early on as a child, and then grappling with it, and I think my outer world looking very different from my inner world, and again, a lot of the outer world was rewarded, a lot of the outer world was acknowledged and recognized, with very little space for the inner world to be acknowledged. And then I think this peak that emerged multiple years later, where it was just hard to reconcile the two worlds anymore. And I think for me, in my own journey, I feel like I experienced a lot of that with Mutton, my second dog, when we adopted her, because again, I think it was so lovely because I think that there was a lot of authenticity to her. I think it's interesting that I would describe it as authenticity. I think there was this sense of my inner world is chaotic, and I am going to behave exactly like that. I'm going to behave in congruence to my inner world being chaotic. And I'm not going to do anything that seems different and feels different. And so it was almost like her saying, do you have capacity to hold my inner world? Do you have capacity to take care of my inner world? Because if you have capacity to be able to do that, then I can offer you something different. But if you don't have capacity to hold my inner world, then I cannot offer you something different. And I think it's interesting that I'm articulating it like that now. But I think that's also the challenge about care-based approaches, right? Because that kind of invitation that I think a lot of dog caregivers, parents, guardians experience with their dogs is hard. It's hard to accept that invitation because I feel like you cannot hold someone else's inner world without having capacity to also hold your inner world. And if you don't have capacity to do that, then that's tricky, isn't it?
It is. And I think, remember when we spoke in Dog Centre Care and you were talking about kind of Mutton's book journey and just what an honest dog, that notion of being a very honest dog, this is how I feel. And, and many of the dogs we work with, that's the phrase I use, your dog's a really honest dog.
Yeah.
They're not hiding anything. But you said something really important, really, really on the money there. And this is why I think as a community, we need more support for each other, more supervision for each other, more pastoral care, because when we start working in this way, we have to ensure that we're as well grounded as we can be fast. And because and we are inviting the caregiver to perceive another living being in a way that is often, I can only talk about the UK kind of societal thing, but we're very much have a heavy conformist approach to behaviour. We're all indoctrinated into that good bad continuum. This notion that that's acceptable and that isn't, regardless of your ability to do that is.
Yeah.
It's still bad to do this. So actually, then, when we provide this opportunity to perceive something different, that can be very hard for the caregiver and their own challenges. So when you think about it, then we can easily, if we're not at, I use this term changing our relationship, because this is the thing for me. I've learned over time to change my relationship with my trauma, to change my relationship with my judgment. We all judge. There's two things we know about humans. We love to judge and we hate to be judged. We love to judge only because our brain's designed for it. We create that safe worldview, which is fully set in by the time we're an adult with our belief systems and our value systems. And the brain wants to do that instant cognitive appraisal. It doesn't want to think about it much. So the reason that we hate to be judged is because we know actually our lived experience is a complicated one. So somebody who judges us don't know what we're experiencing. So we can't judge, but we can change our relationship with judgment. It doesn't have to drive our response.
Yeah.
But these are things that we have to kind of learn and practice about. And I think what we've got a problem with sometimes is if you've got a dog who's struggling to feel safe, to connect, to has a system that's over the place, the caregiver's the same, and then the professional is the same too, then it becomes tricky. And I think this is why a lot of our colleagues go through these boom and bust cycles, compassion fatigue, all these kind of things. Yeah. We have a community that rather than be supportive is often not, sadly. Yeah. And so this is tricky. So I think you've hit something really important there. The beautiful thing, though, is when we understand and give ourselves grace to recognize that we are all on a learning journey of finding self and what that means and how we navigate these things, then actually what we can provide to that caregiver through their dog is actually quite an important and enriching thing for them. Because when we move away from this notion that somehow behavior is right or wrong, good or bad, there's a comfort in that, isn't there? To think, well, that's bad behavior, rather than thinking maybe it's a behavior that's of somebody screaming out in need or whatever else going on. That actually can be very freeing for people, I think. But I can also see why people want to stay within that notion. And you and I, or anybody who works with the public, general public specifically, we can't make people think stuff. That we have the 3 A's in human therapy, which I talk about for us. Because the first thing is awareness. So we have to try and be as aware as we can of the caregiver's experience. And that's where I have my C.A.K.E acronym, compassion, awareness, knowledge, and empathy. Compassion is always a good place to start. And the thing to bear in mind, though, compassion is actually about us navigating our own judgments. Yeah. Because being compassionate is not about being endorsing or being permissive. It's not saying, it's a case of regardless of what I might think myself, I will turn up anyway. So compassion is about turning up. And then the awareness is truly trying to be aware of that lived experience. Again, trying to navigate our own biases. And then knowledge, obviously we bring knowledge, but actually it's the seeking of knowledge. And that makes you have to be a bit vulnerable.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna really seek knowledge from you as a person. And we bring cake for the dog as well. And actually we should bring cake for us, because actually having compassion for ourselves, self-compassion is what is missing. When people have compassion fatigue, that's a sign to me that they are struggling with self-compassion first. And then of course empathy comes along, and empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection, as Brené Brown says, the wonderful Brené Brown. And what that means is the trouble with sympathy, being sympathetic, is it does create a bit of a power imbalance. I sympathize. In other words, what I'm saying is it happened to you, but it didn't happen to me. Whereas empathy is like, okay, yeah, I feel it as best as I can in my own experience. What's really important for us as practitioners is that we can be available to the emotional experience of another, recognize we're not responsible for it. That's really important, because there's something called the righting reflex, which is a reflex that wants us to somehow put it right. So anyway, that's it. So we bring cake to try and be aware of that caregiver. And I find with caregivers, actually, the most important thing they want, if we turn up as a professional feeling insecure about what we're doing, which many of our colleagues can because of the stuff we've talked about, then we can feel, oh, I must talk for the first hour to show you I know what. Whereas actually, I think it's more powerful the way around, which is, I know why I'm here. I feel confident about why I'm here. I want you to talk for the first hour because I want you to feel heard.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful way. So yeah, awareness for them. Then our job, I feel, is to support their awareness of the dog. It's a process of supported awareness. And that's what I see my job as being, actually, supported awareness. The next day is acknowledgement. So we know when we see a client, well, I do here anyway, over in the UK, that there's a good chance that they are influenced by the dominance model or whatever it is, the guy on the telly over here. We've got some rubbish TV over here too. So I know then that their view of their dog may be a good 180 away from potentially the reality for the dog, because they think, oh, my dog's dominant, my dog's naughty, my dog's bad, all these stuff. So we support them through that awareness to then try and support them to acknowledge. And that's the tricky bit, because of their own biases and their own judgments and all the things we talked about at the beginning, So again, that's our role, is to support them to acknowledge. And then the final A is acceptance. And that's where best outcomes come from. Because when they accept, actually, maybe my dog isn't being dominant or difficult, maybe it's because they're stressed, or maybe because they're seeking this. The good thing about acceptance is it unlocks the advocacy part of the brain, which is the best shield they can have to the judgments of others, actually.
Yeah, for sure. I think, oh my God, you've said so many different things, but and I want to go into so many different tangents. But actually, as I was listening to you talk, I was just thinking about, you talked about how the culture in the UK, and I think there's that similarity in India as well, where there is a very highly conformist culture towards good or bad, right? In terms of behavior, this is good behavior, this is bad behavior, and this idea that leaning into these lived experiences of our dogs, leaning into these emotional states of our dogs, is just being really weak, is just being really soft, is just all fluff. I think there are parts of that are definitely true even in the Indian culture. But I think what I'm thinking about is, as I was hearing you talk about all of this, is what was your journey like advocating for this? Because that must have been incredibly hard. I'm sure there are parts of it that are incredibly hard even today, where you are trying to build all of this awareness. You're trying to invite people to think of their dogs differently. You're trying to invite people to view this relationship very differently. But you also perhaps are at the receiving end of criticism. You're also perhaps at the receiving end of, condescension. You're also perhaps at the receiving end of, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. And so tell me a little bit about what that journey has been like, and how does that play out for you?
Well, that's just the way of things. I think, as I kind of alluded to earlier, the real consequence of my challenges as a child was my drug addiction and breakdown, which was in my early 30s. And but also I'm so thankful for that, especially the breakdown, because that was my first opportunity to reconnect to self, to come home, if you
Mm.
like, after spending all my 20s being something I wasn't, to try and appease and please. And I think many of us fall into it. So what that has meant is by the time I come into the dog community, especially by the time I started to do things and you build a bit of a profile, and I'm one of those kind of people who's kind of done that reluctantly. I don't do a lot of stuff. It's when I get invited to things and they say, "Oh, have you got this? Have you got that? You know, where's your mailing list?" I think, well, I don't have any of that. I just do stuff, and because that's not what motivates me. But so I'm lucky in as far as I have really good, healthy self-esteem. I
Mm.
have a healthy emotional health because I really work at it because I have to. So that does allow me the chance to kind of take the knocks as they come, and they come. Oh God, they come. For me, it's an invitation. I'm not a particularly academic speaker, but I have amazing colleagues who can do that. I'm
Mm.
just like, let's think about this. So
Mm.
when I shared at a conference last year about my abuse as a child and the consequences, what I was asking the audience to think about, maybe consequences aren't about
Mm.
ABC. Maybe there's the consequence of the consequence of the consequence. And maybe the
Mm.
consequence for me was if I'd have had, for example, a teacher who saw beyond my behavior, who held space, who brought cake, had compassion,
Mm.
awareness, knowledge, of empathy. Maybe I might have shared something then where the consequence of that intrinsically, not
Yeah.
extrinsically, intrinsically meant I wouldn't have had a drug addiction breakdown. Who knows? Because I haven't got a time machine.
Yeah.
But we have to ask questions. And one of the things I do in my emotional health workshops for professionals is that I ask
Mm.
the question, who are you? Who are you? You alluded to this earlier, actually, about yourself, about that inner thing and then the outer expression. And especially, who are you as a professional? And it's quite a profound thing because from a very young age, our sense of self, our value of self is kind of pulled in all sorts of directions based on the narratives and judgments of others. That
Yeah.
unhelpful teacher, parents,
Yeah.
peers, relationships.
Yeah.
And I almost think about the dog, actually, who's had to kind of put up with a lot of emphasis on structured learning and compliance and
Mm.
that kind of thing. I almost feel the same, like, well, who are you? And if the dog could speak, they'd be like, well, I don't know. I don't know, actually, because I have to perform all the time. So I don't know where I'm going with this. Anyway, but so yeah, so come back to this thing. So when I put out the Phantom of the Opera, and I know it was it was a title that was meant to kind of get people to think about it, but it was just my thoughts. I didn't think it was going to go nuts like it did, and it's interesting because a lot of people were like, yeah, they either were like, that's amazing, and thought about that, or a lot of people, I've had those thoughts, but you put it in words for me, and this is how I connected to people like Sindor and Kim Brophy and others who had already been talking about other things, and so I didn't think it was a particularly controversial piece. It was actually a piece about compassion and empathy and about thinking about what we might do to another just by making them do stuff based on primary reinforcement. But then you had people, because of their own filters, think that it's about this or it's about that. And I see the
Mm.
people's words about it and I think, well, I didn't actually say that. I didn't actually mean that. So you get that. But I think in your head, we have to recognize as soon as we put anything out for public view,
Mm.
two things really important. One is we've got to expect other people to have their view. We shouldn't be too precious about it because they're going to have a view about it. And then secondly, the important thing for me is there's always going to be those people who really get what you say. There's going to be the other people, the other end, who it doesn't matter what you do, they're not going to
Yeah.
like you. They misrepresent you. They whatever. But the bulk of people are in the middle who are neutral. And if we're not careful, we focus in on these people down here. And it stops us from doing more things. My late father had a saying which was just turn up, which is on my teddy here. That's my late father's jumper. My husband made a teddy out of it, and it's got just turn up stitched into the paw. Just turn up. That's what's kept me going all the time, because it's hard to turn up sometimes. It just is. And I think the thing I found more tricky really is, and interestingly, just on this, the general public get it. Working with clients, actually, they're like, yeah, I get this most of the time because they've tried the other stuff anyway. But also they're like, yeah, I get that. So I use words like relief. That's my big thing that people kind of know me for talking about, because I think it's such a powerful word. Because we seek relief. A lot of these behaviors are relief-seeking behaviors. That's the key.
Yeah.
And so the clients know about relief. Then and they know what these kind of things feel like. And a lot of the time, they've just been indoctrinated into this view of their dog, but they have a beautiful lived relational experience with them.
Yeah.
And so many of them, they're like, oh, actually, I did feel uncomfortable with that, and this does make more sense to me. What I found is that it also, I get probably half a dozen people a month from the aversive community contact me via dog centre care, because they're looking to do something different. I spoke to a lady before Christmas. We had about 3 hours on Zoom, really inspirational conversation, because they've come across dog centre care. They've heard some of the chats. They already feel that something's not right for them in how they work. But all they normally get is reward-based trainers telling them how to do task differently. Well, guess what? They can do task really well.
Yeah.
But when they hear this kind of thing, they think that's actually makes more sense about why I need to shift.
Yeah.
So the problem has been on our side of the fence, actually, reinforcement-based trainers who the operant model is somehow so sanctisanct, it's so there that it can't be challenged. This notion that I think people feel that the fight for reinforcement has been a hard one, I know, but that isn't the end of the story. It shouldn't be. It's the beginning of the story more than. The thing I find the most challenging is the personal stuff that comes over time. And I think what I've learned is, I think some people can. So I've always tried to create supportive spaces, and but I also have to keep myself safe, because that's really important. I do practice what I preach, and I think people can misinterpret somebody who tries to be compassionate and supportive with somebody who will be bullied and told what to do, because I won't be. And the trouble is, then when you do say no, when you do challenge some things, there are a few people, it's only a small number, but who take that badly, and then of course you're not who they try and put out a message, you're not who you say you are, and all this kind of. So that's just the normal, I call it the drama llama, that goes on, and I try not to let it affect me too much. It does hurt. I've heard some really challenging things that about me as a person, and the thing that protects me is, I think, well, you don't know me, actually. That's your interpretation. And if people want to listen to that and hear it, but that's not unusual for me. This is what happens, I'm afraid, especially now. There seems to be a shift since COVID about the environment in social media, about rather than people just disagree with you. So when Phantom the Operant came out, it was mainly just people saying, oh, well, this is rubbish, isn't it? Whatever. And I'm thinking, well, that's fair enough. But there seems to be a shift now, Surabhi, with people that are kind of, they want to kind of bring you down. They want to character and assassinate you.
Yeah.
So it's tricky sometimes, but I think that just comes with it. And this is why I always say to people, our biggest shield is our purpose. Passion is, we start off with passion, but passion is a really fragile thing, actually. When we find our purpose, then we can keep reevaluating. And I look at stuff, I talk about stuff, it's tricky sometimes, and you do have to reevaluate often. Is it worth it? Should I pull back a bit? Do I stop doing this? Do I stop doing that? That's the beautiful thing about my husband. Kieran is my rock, really, and I need him to keep going. So it can be difficult to navigate. But the biggest thing is for us, I think, is we're trying to take our lead from the dog. We're trying to learn more and more about what that lived experience might be, by being humble enough to recognize that we know a bit of it. So actually, we can't go too far wrong. And I have asked people when I've talked about things and they say, oh, where's your evidence for this or where's your evidence for that? I tried evidence-based what I can, but some bits are subjective and I don't. And I ask them kindly, where's your evidence that there isn't?
Mm.
Because I'd sooner fall on the side of thinking maybe I've seen that 10 times with this dog, and maybe that's what that dog needs to feel safe. And I will get the feedback from the dog over time to see if that plays out. And I think we can't just stay in a rigid sense of having to evidence-base everything.
Yeah.
We should be able to think, I can stand on the subjectiveness of science, but look out to the subjectivity of the lived experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, again, you say such lovely things that makes my brain go in multiple different directions. But I'm curious to know, like, I think for me personally, when I started, and I've not been doing this very long, it's been fairly recent, but I think that I walked in very, with a with a lot of like veiled sense of what it is to be doing this work. And I think that when I walked into this space, I think what I saw as the most credible was how much you know about dog behavior and dogs and the science, and being able to sort of tell people what to do and how to do, and being able to fix issues, right? I thought that's what the ideal was, really. But I think in my own journey, but also I think in terms of what I'm seeing with just the general public, I think conversations that I have with clients, I'm recognizing the need for more authenticity, the need to show up as an individual with humility, the need to show up as an individual who is open to learning, who's curious about learning, the need to show up as an individual who is able to also say, I don't know in some moments, or that I don't have the answer in some moments. And I'm finding that these things, which I don't think have gained enough attention, or have been central points of any conversation, really, when it comes to dog professionals. I think these things are gaining a little bit more space, a little bit more momentum. Do you find that to be true as well? Are you seeing that as well?
Well, yeah, I think that's one of the motivations for me saying that dog-centered care as a group.
Mm.
So, we all have our success. For me, is always based upon a bit of luck and the generosity of others. I look at my own thing. It was people like Sarah Fisher and Victoria Still. I met Victoria through. I set up the UK Dog Behaviour and Training Charter here in the UK. That's another story. Anyway, but I did it. I did manage to do it, and that was hard, trying to get all these different organisations and associations to come behind something, and I worked hard at that, and that's that. I do see that as one of my strengths, really, the ability to bring people into a space. And I met Victoria there, and I ended up going on her podcast to talk about the charter, and I just happened to share a few things about the Phantom of the Opera and stuff, and that went a bit nuts. So I got asked back to just talk about that, and then I got invited to the conference. So these are the things that happen. You see, this is that thing about just turning up. You never know what comes next, really,
Yeah.
and recognizing the generosity of others, people who believe in you and say, "Yeah, let's see what happens." And because of that, I thought, well, I haven't got anything, because nobody knows who I am or what I'm talking about. So I thought, let me set up a group. And I also recognize, and I've always tried to do this as best I can, is I haven't invented anything. There's nothing new under the sun, as they say. What is unique is our own personal interpretation and how we filter. We learn from others, and we must never forget those shoulders that we are standing on, as I say. So Turid and Linda Rugas, of course, Sarah Fisher for me, and others, and Sheila Harper. Well, there's lots of other people like that. But so I thought, right, let's set up a little group, and I'll call it dog-centered care, bringing that over from child-centered care, because it's just a case of thinking, right, care is a cool word, and let's think about the dog. That's all it was. and let's trying to bring together all these strands, because you've got people talking about neurology, pain. Robert Faulkner Taylor in my group the other day talked about sensory processing sensitivities. It was mind-blowing stuff. And I thought I'd maybe get a few hundred people in there, and but it's just gone a bit nuts. So that's why I'm so proud of that space, because there's a lot of spaces out there that are, and I'm not criticizing them for this, but they are very much for that particular thing. I wanted to create a platform where I do share some of my stuff, but it's dog centre care with Andrew Hale. That's because I just happen to be there. It's not, but and that's what's happened now. We've got all these wonderful voices that are coming together. A lot of these conversations used to be seen as either woo-woo or just like an add-on, like, we do normal operant training, but we add on that. Now we're seeing, hang on, the training's the last bit. I've got my learn, support, teach kind of thing, which is learn from the dog, support what we learn, and then teach what we think might be intrinsically valuable as part of their lived experience. Then you can train what you like. So actually training is the add-on when you think about it. I hear you. And we've got all these beautiful voices, and they really know their stuff. And there's a richness there. It's quite overwhelming. I don't know about you, but I go through periods of thinking, oh my God, this is amazing, to thinking, wow, overwhelming. And we do have to stay humble. And we need to let caregivers know that some of the dogs that they let share their lives with, that particular lived experience is quite a complicated one. And it is not them. The problem with a task-oriented approach, regardless of method, even if you're just using reinforcement, is that if the task can't be completed, somebody's to blame. The owner's not doing it right, the dog's no good. Or sadly, even the trainer then thinks, I can't do my job. Whereas you think, wow, the best we can do in this scenario is steady the ship and provide a supportive platform. Because, and I can tell you now, having worked with humans where we can talk, it is just as challenging, if not more so, actually, in some ways. So this actually, my favorite posts in the group are caregivers. The caregivers there's a lot of caregivers who ask questions, but there's a lot of caregivers who share their story. They've done the train more, but then they realize, I need to listen more. And actually, I need to take pressure off myself. I need to stop trying to fix things. So we owe it to the general public. I feel that dog training more generally, and I'm not anti-training, and I think that's important. Dog training for me is neutral. It's not good or bad. We're just talking about, don't think about good or bad. People often say to me, do you think dog training is bad, or are you anti-dog training? I'm like, no, it's just a thing that we do, but it's neutral. But the general public, however, have been persuaded, especially here in the UK, that the most important thing is to have a well-trained, obedient dog. And we are letting them down because they know how to teach sit, great, but they don't know what pain looks. They don't know what stress looks like. They don't understand attachment. They don't understand anything else. And the relationship is going to struggle. And when I was growing up in the 70s here in the UK, we didn't do much training. We had maybe a training class in a field on a Sunday morning. We had Barbara Woodhouse on the telly, bless her. I think people did have more of a relational. I'm not saying welfare was any better or worse, but I think we just were more. We just were. We got on with it. So actually, we do need to think about this in a very deep way as a community. We need to let the aversive community get on with doing task stuff. And as far as, I call it the operant merry-go-round. We can't keep fighting that narrative on just trying to do task nicer. We have to let them know. And this is why a lot of the aversive trainers, when they put out their memes and their TikToks, they laugh at the positive stuff, because for them, they think, well, I can do it this way. When we need to let that, I'm doing a little video at the moment, which I'm just finishing off to put out there, to kind of almost apologize to the general public about how they're being lied to and gaslighted, because they've been convinced that somehow their dog is bad, therefore you must do this unpleasant thing. And we need this more than ever. I think from a dog welfare point of view, we need these other discussions, and we need many voices. And that's what Dog Centre Care is about as a platform, to bring as many voices as possible so that people can take the threads that they need to build a better understanding, not just of their dog's lived experience, but actually for their own. Because that's the beautiful thing about this. It's got nothing to do with dogs, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's got more about releasing ourselves from the shackles of the
Mm.
expectations and judgments of others, of society, and other conformist norms. Because
Yeah.
we're all the
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. I feel like I think that, so many times when I'm talking to clients myself, I think one of the first things that I tell them is let's not let's not get obsessed with training. Can we just first figure out how do we establish a sense of connection and safety with our dogs? Right? Because once we do that, so much of what we're experiencing in this relationship will settle automatically, right? And then we can look at what is other support that you need. But first and foremost, let's look at safety and let's look at connection. Um, and I have personally found that I think that in a lot of cases, I think they're just waiting to hear that. And I think very similar to what you said, because they've been through those models, right? Where it's just train more, do the task better, just keep at it. If you're not able to do it, there is something wrong with you. There is something wrong with your dog. I mean, I've had clients come back and tell me that trainers have dismissed their dogs off as just horrible dogs who cannot learn something, right? And that's heartbreaking. That's just so heartbreaking. And I think at the point that they find people like us, there's already so much that has gone into their relationship that I think a lot of our work first is really to care for them, to care for that relationship, and get them to that place of safety and connection. Before we can do any other behavior work with them. But I think that getting them to that point of, oh my god, I am so sorry, this is hard, this is really hard, and I think acknowledging their emotions in that process becomes so important. um and I know that,
Yes, and
yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
no, sorry, go on. That's right.
No, I was going to say that I know that of late you have been talking a lot about care-based approaches. And I know your platform, of course, and through all the conversations that you have, it's really interesting. Through all the conversations you have, is putting that message out there. But you have of late started doing like solo conversations, and you've been really passionate about it. You've been really vocal about it. And I think those have been great. I heard two of them, and I thought those were amazing. But I am curious to know as to like what tipped you over to saying, listen, I'm just going to take space on this and I'm going to talk about it full-fledgedly with utmost conviction and passion. So what happened there?
Well, that was the original plan was that I was going to have a little dog centre care group, and then I was going to do some little chats about what dog centre care would be about. But I find it hard to turn up sometimes. As I say, just turn up. I find collaborative spaces a lot easier for me. And because dog centre care went a bit nuts quite quickly, and I started even just when I first started, even me interviewing somebody was a big thing because it's all a bit much. I think people have a perception of me that I'm quite a confident speaker, and actually I am, but I have to work at that. I don't just think, oh, this is going to be great. So, oh my God, poor old Kieran, before I go and talk at conferences and stuff, the week before, he's having to really keep me from turning into a jelly on a plate. So it's taken 2 years, because it's been going 2 years for me to think, Joe, I'm just gonna say some stuff. Because I put my own articles in the group. And this is why I don't put a lot of commentary in the group, because I think, well, people know what I want to say, and I'll put some things in sometimes on some posts, but we've got such a great community there. I don't need to add anything all the time. So that was the main reason. Also, I was at a conference actually, talking at a conference last year, and a person said, I've been following your group, but I've not heard you talk, not heard you present before. And said that was a really powerful presentation. And I thought maybe it was about time just to say, well, this is what I think. And that's all it is. I always say that at the beginning of these chats. These are just my thoughts. That, what does it mean for you? So I think that's why I've started doing them. And I just wanted to talk about a few things about the first chat I did was just talking about dog training. Again, I'm sure you find this. You find yourself misquoted and misrepresented. And you think, well, at some point, I better say what I think about training then, because people say, oh, he says this and he says that. And I think, well, actually, I haven't said any of that. But so it's nice just to put stuff out there and think, well, this is my words, and you can hear them and you can judge them as you wish to. But yeah, they went down really well. So I just did a little series of 3, back to interviewing people in the group now, and I'm sure I'll come back and share a few other things here and there. But yeah, so that was another experience for me, just to kind of put myself, even just because it's weird, isn't it? Don't you think? Because we're talking to each other, so we're chatting. I know people are going to listen in, but I feel like I'm talking to a friend, which is lovely. When you're just there, you do it a lot, and I really respect you for it, because you are just talking to your camera. It's a really vulnerable space, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't know who's going to turn up and anything
Yeah.
else. So yeah. So anyway, I've given it a go, and that's
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, but those are great. I love it because I feel like, I mean, I think you do such a wonderful job. Like when you're talking to guests, you do such a wonderful job of letting the people that you're hosting, the people that you're inviting, really shine and take up space. And you're obviously this amazing listener. But I think what was so interesting for me to experience when you were doing the solo talks was, I think you also taking up so much space, and you giving yourself, I think all of those things that you give your interviewees in these conversations. And so I thought that was great to watch and experience, and it was pretty cool. Yeah, so I'm hoping that you would do a lot more of those as well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was quite cathartic in a way, because I thought, yeah, I'll just say, in my head, I thought I'll do maybe a 20-minute, but of course each one was about an hour, because when I get going, as you know, I've got plenty of things I want to share. What I love about dog centre care for me personally, and it's a bit of a selfish thing really, but I've had 80 conversations in that group now. So if you look at the YouTube channel, and I've tried to curate it in such a way that there's all sorts of different threads. Some of them are a bit at a tangent, but I think they kind of connect in. It's just the wonderfulness of continuing to learn, because the mainstream in the community is quite learning theory biased, quite operant conditioning bias, which is fine. But I've been there and I've learned that. And you think, where do I learn new stuff? And so I have these wonderful people come to me and to spend that hour, and I just love it. And I love what they have to give and offer. And many of the speakers who have come have credited the dog centre care to be an extra platform for them, which is boosted for them, which is great. And also a place where they felt safe to talk, because that, and share. And I think so that's a wonderful thing for me. And so yeah, I'm very lucky to have that, and the community that's created. I have to do a bit behind the scenes, but actually I don't have to moderate the group too much, because it's just a great community. So yeah, I'm very grateful for it. And I got a chance to speak to people like yourself, of course, and I think that's really great. And I know we're thinking about doing something more in the group in the not too distant future there.
Yeah.
So I'm quite protective over the platform now. Again, I get about 30 plus requests to post in the group, and I don't. So I have to say, I say no to a lot of people, and most people get it. Some people don't. Sadly, they get a bit upset. But the point is, one of the charms for me is the group. I see myself like an editor of a magazine. And I think when people put in a post, they're asking it to be submitted. And I have to think, what's the general vibe today? I only let maybe 2 or 3 in a day, because otherwise it just gets swamped and we lose it. Sometimes it's stuff that's already been talked about. But the biggest misrepresentation, I think people think it's a dog training group, and it's not. It's not that it's not a dog, but it's more than that. It's called the emotional experience of dogs and their caregivers, and that's the point. So that's the only challenging bit that comes up when it gets a bit big. But no, I've got some great more conversations coming up. I've got some really interesting people. So it's a very lucky position, really. It takes a lot of effort, as you know. These things, we do all this stuff. We don't get any financial incentive for it, other than what we get from it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're being very humble about the amount of work that goes into it, because it is a ton of work for sure. I think it's very hard, and I think, like you said, your groups grown so much in size. There are so many new people every single day coming in, being part of this space. I think to retain the essence of it, to retain the spirit of it, with so many different new people, and again, coming from very different journeys and backgrounds, I think that's a big challenge, and you do it amazingly. And so I'm really glad that I'm part of the group, and I'm really glad that yeah, we had the chance to talk about nutrition and food, because I think up until that conversation, I don't think I had spoken about it in that way. And again, I think that was possible only because you invited me into that space and you held that space for me. So that's something that I'll always be very grateful to you about. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think this is one of the other beautiful things, because of course you get to know people and you make connections, and there are people you get on with and some people that you kind of move on from a little bit. But I've always loved our space together, and I'm really excited this year, of course, because Sindor's coming to the UK, and it looks like we're going on a little bit of a road trip together because we're both talking. So that's exciting. And my plan really is to come over to India. Actually, I was talking to
Yes.
Sindor about it. And my husband is he's got his stuff this year because he's going off to Dollywood in America with his Dolly Parton friends, so I'll let them get on with it. So I thought, well, that's fair enough. Next year could be India for me then. I think that would be great.
Absolutely.
And I'm inspired to want to come and learn from you all. This is the point. I want to learn and I want to immerse myself in this stuff because I find it really fascinating and interesting, and that's quite exciting adventure. But if ever you come to the UK, and
Yes.
we'll show you around Devon and
Absolutely.
get you a fine dining of cream teas. That's prawns and jam.
Lovely, amazing. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your time today. This was so lovely to catch up. And I'm so glad that you said yes to this and we got to do it. And hopefully, I will bring you back for many other conversations. But thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you. Great to see you.
Awesome.